Hello, friends. Welcome back. To what I have chosen to call and repeatedly refer to in public and private coming. Here it comes. Do you know it? Do you know the answer? Do you know what it is? That's right. It's the history of rock and roll in film. And rock and roll. You may call it what you like. Now, today's format's going to be a little different than a lot of the usual ones. Not a follow-along, watch-along like I did with Sid and Nancy on the last episode, where I fill in all the gaps with, information so you can just watch along with the film. I am live reacting to the film in this case, but I have edited it all, chopped a bunch of pieces of that out, and separated them with background information about the musicians involved, but not in a way that adheres to the running time of the film. Now, bear with me on my early reactions as I'm watching in real time, because I started doing a little bit of research while I was watching the movie in my living room, and I can't remember, but I don't want to go back and listen to it all piece by piece. I think I have a couple of mistakes early on before I look them up, and then I correct them in the narration outside of the movie when I'm talking about the background of the Blasters or Jim Steinman or whatever. So if you hear me say that, the Blasters are on stage in the opening scene of the film, I was wrong about that, obviously. They show up in the second sort of live musical set piece in the film, playing a Carl Perkins song, I think it is, Big Bad Stud. Hadn't done all my research on the Blasters as I was watching the film. I was going to do that afterwards, but I had it in my head from maybe reading some incorrect information that the Blasters were the live band that you see in the film, not one of a couple of different live bands that you see in the film. So today you're going to hear me in chunks that alternate between reactions to the film in real time, background on Jim Steinman and some of his other works and projects, and the background on the band The Blasters. And we'll start with some Jim Steinman after I read a couple of reviews. Yes, we finally got enough attention that we have 2 whole reviews on Apple Podcasts. One is from Ron Paul 1111, who says, "We are Motorhead, 5 stars. Legends never die, even when they are killed by death." He's obviously referring to Lemmy, who I have said multiple times is the king of rock and roll. And I was really proud of all the work I put into the Lemmy episode. Thank you for that very much, Ron Paul 1111. And then we have one that's titled J for Pay, 5 stars, from Crandall Kills. "Whenever I hear Jay talk, I just start shooting big loads uncontrollably. It has made me a disgusting embarrassment to my family, who have since abandoned me and written me off as dead. At least I still have my podcasts." Yes, you do, Crandall Kills. Yes, you do. Obviously, I welcome all your reviews if you're a listener of this podcast, because I assume they will be somewhat favorable. If you have problems with my podcast, you probably don't listen long enough to want to leave a review, or the problems you have with me would just be something intrinsically annoying about my podcast that I would never make you happy anyway. All I can say is I don't think there's another show like this out there in the podcast sphere when it comes to the subject matter I'm covering and the way in which I'm doing it and the crippling fatigue it causes my brain, as well as all sorts of guilt for not knowing everything all the time and having taken so long to know what little it is that I do know. And if instead of leaving a review, or in addition to leaving a review, you want to contact me about possible ideas for future episodes, reach out at rockfilmrock on Twitter, or maybe if you want to write an email, for now, it's justtheworstever@gmail.com. You can also find me at justtheworstever on Instagram. Also, contact me, please, via one of those sources if you know someone you think I should interview. If you have a friend or family member that was on the inside track with some of these movies, or just a interesting story about a band maybe, or if you know some other rock and roll or history podcasters or movie podcasters that you think I should maybe contact about interviewing or being on their show or some kind of a crossover thing. We'll see. All right, now on to it. We're going to go into my setup for the Jim Steinman first chunk. Then we'll go into my first chunk of Streets of Fire reaction. And then we'll move into the first chunk of Blasters information, and we'll start sort of cycling. I have commented before and shall comment again on how much I do not favor the recorded works or performative works of folks like Jim Steinman, the Meatloafs, the Rocky Horror Picture Show type thingies. It doesn't work for me. I don't relate to it. That doesn't mean I hate it. It means that this will be another one of those episodes similar to the Steve Vai and Shred Guitar episodes where I'm learning a lot and presenting my own bias on the subject, but enjoying having a non-emotional attachment to the subject at hand. And Steinman comes across to me when he is in charge of his own presentation via things like the video Jim Steinman Opens Pandora's Box, which is searchable and findable on the YouTube. He's a little pretentious, but not as much as I thought he would come across as. He's pretentious like a theater kid is pretentious. That's essentially what he is. He's a musical theater kid that made a lot of money. And I think, in my judgment, my very knowledgeable, cerebral, sound, and righteous judgment, because it's my show, and I've decided that's what it is exactly, and there shall be no qualification necessary to you, because I don't know you. I think he turned out about as well as a rich theater kid could that wanted to stay in rock and roll. I think he's mostly rock and roll, over theater kid, musical theater performer person, writer person, producer person. I think he probably did a lot more good on this world than harm when it comes to his musical accomplishments. I can't say anything for his personal life. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that had a lot of reporters chasing him around to pry into his personal life, so I won't speak to that. But he's a dude with a lot of interesting ideas that worked really well for him and a lot of other folks. Does that sound ambivalent? It shouldn't in today's day and age where most everything is awful when created by people for the purposes of media and entertainment. I can't possibly do the man's entire career or catalog justice, so I will focus on the parts of it that are most interesting to me, because that's what I do this for. And I think sometimes the weirder elements of a person's career, especially a creative person's career, and the more surreal or the less normal things they did, speak volumes about them and their creative, potential, but also their work rate, their work ethic, if you will, and I hope you will, because I was provoked to look deeper into the works and the mind of Jim Steinman based on a YouTube video by the channel Trash Theory. I think Trash Theory, or alternately New British Canon. It was titled The Smirking Revenge of This Corrosion, a video about the band Sisters of Mercy. And when I saw the levels to which their lead singer, Eldritch, would go to humiliate and dominate former band members who were trying to strike out on their own and made some very obvious attempts to co-opt the name Sisters of Mercy, and that it took Eldritch enlisting the help of one Jim Steinman for multiple reasons. I was thoroughly impressed. I love that seems to be that band's biggest breakout period for a larger audience, and that, of course, because that background, that band came from a post-punk, independent, gothy kind of background, they don't really appreciate a lot of fans that only think of them in terms of that Floodland era that Jim Steinman worked on. But he gave him full credit on what he did to raise their status, increase their budget at the record label, and create a really effective, powerful, and interesting sound for them that no one else ever would have done the way that he did. Watching Jim himself talk about rock and roll and what inspired him and what he holds dear about this thing that we all hold dear, rock and roll, I am struck by how many well-formed ideas he has, but how, may I say, not confident he is in the presentation. I know that sounds ironic because I'm fishing for words right now. I'm just processing all of this in real time because I've been watching a lot of clips of him on YouTube. And, some of this is like from 1989, and he seems like he's doing a weird version of a green screen kind of TED Talk thing about rock and roll and his own vision of it for this new album he's promoting. And it might be nervousness, it might be cocaine or something, but he seems like a middle-aged looking dude that is actually a teenage kid that just got out of his own bedroom to give this presentation. And it's 100% him, 100% Jim.
I remember everything. I remember everything! I remember every little thing as if it happened only yesterday. I was barely 17. I was barely 17, and I once killed a boy with a Fender guitar. I don't remember if it was a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, but I do remember that it had a heart of chrome and a voice like a horny angel. I don't remember if it was a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, but I do remember that it wasn't at all easy.
Hi, welcome to Luthier Skeptic Talk. This is your host, Jay Smith. I think you would remember if it was a Fender Telecaster or Stratocaster. They are wildly different in body shape and features, and I think what you might have been going for is you don't remember if it was a Jazzmaster or a Stratocaster, perhaps. You know, they can both have a whammy bar and a curvy body and a similar layout. But go on.
It required the perfect angle and the precise power chords. The guitar bled for about a week afterward. And the blood was dark and rich like wild berries. The blood of the guitar was chuckberry red. The guitar bled for about a week afterward, but it wrung out beautifully. And I was able to play notes that I had never even heard before.
All right, just watching the first few minutes of Streets of Fire, there's a lot going on here. First of all, great opening title with the introduction of a rock and roll fairy tale, Another Time, Another Place. That's a great method of just telling your audience what they're in for, and to shut up and sit back and listen and pay attention and don't be griping about anything that's not realistic to you here, because, we're not playing by the normal rules. Obviously, this is a musical. It doesn't come out. It comes right out at the beginning and starts with a song, and it starts with a person singing the song. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't have that trope of musicals, to begin with at least, where the characters are singing about themselves or singing about their day. You're not introduced to multiple characters via song lyrics, right? You're not shifting from perspective to perspective, like, oh, here's your female lead and here's complications in their life, and then here's your male lead, and then whatever. There's no introductory song like in Beauty and the Beast or whatever for Belle. The Provincial Little Life. Anyway, Diane Lane had to have had a hard time with this opening song because there's never a break. It's a hyper, like, I don't know, man. Punk rockers were, and 50s rockers were famous or infamous for, writing and playing songs while they were high on amphetamines. I don't know if musical theater folks get that way. Maybe it was cocaine. I don't know. But the song is just so hyperactive. There's all these tom roll, like flash dance style. That's for a reason, of course. There's common denominators here in the music of this and the music of that era, as well as flash dance specifically. It's just, and the lyrics are nonstop. There's not a breath between that, like the verse and the chorus and the bridge of the song. So it's not like memorizing a script where you say something and someone else says something, or you say something and you have maybe a monologue and then you react to something in the scenery that changes what you say next. This is just an actor having to memorize a really long, well, not even long, but a very dense set of song lyrics, and the camera's trained on her face most of the goddamn song. So there aren't enough cutaways or edits or shots of the rest of the band to allow her to miss any of these, lines. I mean, obviously it's edited. Obviously she probably sang this many, 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 many times, and they edited together all the best, most dramatic takes. But this is also the kind of song presentation, a visual representation of the world we're about to sort of stay in for a while, right? Because we're saying to you, the audience, this is the presentation on stage and the music in the air that most people in our town that we're presenting to you respond to fanatically, evidently, because Rick Moranis has a throwaway line about the place being packed, but nobody here has any money, doesn't have a pot to piss in, right? So these are people that probably had to scrape together their last nickels and dimes for the week to be able to come to this benefit show for this artist. And the how stylized they are, and what a obvious musical theater type presentation this is of rock and roll. This is the romanticized version of rock and roll that theater kids love. Like, this is the kind of soundtrack that I'm sure is very near and dear to the hearts of a lot of people that were theater kids in the 80s. The kind of folks that, bought a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber soundtracks maybe in the 90s. I don't know. But it certainly feels like they do a great job of establishing right away. This is a different world. It's a little bit fantastical, but we are taking the liberty of incorporating what we love about the look of 50s rock with the sound of the 80s in a presentation and a song structure that is straight out of, Rocky Horror style type of rock and roll. Like, none of this is real rock and roll if you ever listen to real rock and roll, right? It's movie people and music theater people's perception of what they think rock and roll in their head is when they envision it, or in their reality, whatever world they live on, or what they would like it to be forever, I'm pretty sure. And I'm doing the listener no favors by reviewing this, because I don't have any love for this kind of presentation of rock and roll, but I'm impressed. I would never probably purchase this soundtrack and hold it close to my bosom and build memories listening to these songs. I would probably always feel like, if I was the person that loved this soundtrack, I'd probably just always feel like my life sucked because I couldn't live in this world, in this crazy, colorful, yet violent and dark world where there's excitement happening around every corner, and Rick Moranis plays a very serious character. And there's, music that represents the feelings and the passions of an entire population of the town. I think that's all I wanted to say based on what is the first 4 minutes of this film. I'm excited by the arrival of the motorcycle gang because they show them appearing in the dark. You only saw the headlights of their motorcycles. You don't see really much about the bikes or what make they are. Or, you don't see what the guys look like at all, which I think is a very bold choice. And then you can see people sort of having made way for them in the crowd because the people's faces that are happy are lit. And then there's this presence where there's these heads coming forward in the crowd. The tops of these guys' heads but you can't see their faces. They're not lit at all. And I'm really digging that. I really like that they didn't spotlight the leader of the gang or anything yet. We don't know anything about these guys. We don't know if they're here to be protection. But we probably figure that they're not. They're probably up to some no good shenanigans. The band featured very prominently in Streets of Fire is the Blasters. Blasters started in the late 70s in Downey, California, hometown of one James Hetfield of Metallica. Played a lot of shows with a bunch of punk bands. It sounded nothing like them, of course. You know, played with Black Flag, the Gun Club, the Screamers, X. Henry Rollins actually mentions them in his book, Get in the Van. He said, "In my mind, they were a great band that not enough people found out about. Bill Bateman is one of the best drummers there is. And then, of course, there are the Alvin brothers. A lot of talent for one band." And I'm blown away by the early mid-'80s footage of the Blasters I've seen, that the drummer is just so powerful. There's a lot of drummers out there that are creative and exciting, but they don't always lead the band. Sometimes they're more reactive, like Stuart Copeland of the Police or Bill Ward of Black Sabbath. But you know, among the more aggressive leading kind of drummers, there's some that can lead a little too fast or not be consistent. And man, all the footage I've seen of the Blasters back in the day, the drums are just unbelievably consistent and driving and energetic and still cleanly played somehow. Just so directly, aggressively on beat. In an article for Uncut Magazine from the early 2000s, covering Dave Alvin and the Blasters, the writer, credited only as Alan, discusses what it was like to meet the band back in around 1982. He said, Dave was the lead guitarist and songwriter in the Blasters, the American roots legends now, unknown then. The band he'd formed in the East LA suburb of Downey with his vocalist brother Phil. The Blasters played a sensational mix of blues, rockabilly, R&B, rock and roll, and as I've probably mentioned before, they did as much as, say, REM, The Replacements, or Husker Du to revitalize American music in the early 80s before splitting prematurely in 1985 after just 4 albums. I met them in a motel in somewhere called Mesquite in the drab boondocks outside Dallas. Walking into a room full of quiffs, bandanas, motorcycle boots, leather jackets, and hard-nosed attitude. For the week I went on to spend with them, I had one of the best times of my life, tearing across Texas. The band playing fantastic shows in Dallas and Austin, where they supported Joe Eli at the Austin Coliseum and blew even that seasoned campaigner off the stage. The last night I'm with them, they were at a club called Fitzgerald's, an old Polish dance hall on the outskirts of Houston, where they played one of the best gigs I've ever seen. The band augmented by the roaring horns of Steve Berlin, who went on to play with and produce Los Lobos, and the legendary Lee Allen, who had played sax with Little Richard and Fats Domino on their early hits. I remember sitting with Dave on a rickety staircase outside the venue after the show. Dave's still pumped up. "Like I told you earlier, man," he said, a beer in either hand. "When we're hot, you better stand back. And when we're really hot, with the horns and everything, man, I defy anyone to follow us. Maybe Springsteen could, maybe the Stones. Anyone else, I think we could handle," he added. And he wasn't bluffing. The Blasters in their prime were so good, there was no need. He was just telling it like it was. Okay, so many more thoughts already. I spoke too soon. Right when I stopped recording and turned the movie back on, I was treated to a very obvious spotlight entrance of Willem Dafoe's face. They're finishing the end of the song. Diane Lane's pumping her fist in the air like she's not because she is the warrior tearing down the walls of heartache, bang, bang, or she is it will be invincible, or that she's Pat Benatar or fucking whatever. And you see the gang rush the stage. Of course, if their whole goal was to kidnap this woman, it would seem logically and logistically more sensible to do it maybe as she was exiting the venue and most people had gone home, or before she arrived at the venue earlier in the day when she was isolated, perhaps. I don't know, but, well, we know why. They do it they do it on a stage that everyone in town is staring at so everyone can identify the criminals, I suppose, as easy as possible. But, you know, that's what makes it awesome and dramatic. You get to see these guys, these greasers in black leather, rush the stage under awesome stage lighting and beat the piss out of the band, which is kind of cool, actually. Those shots were done really well, very effective in the violence. And the crowd, you know, confusion and chaos, and them dragging her out through the front door as opposed to just going out the backstage entrance, which would have been a lot shorter, a lot quicker. If have a getaway car there. But no, they're not that kind of gang. They are motorcycle punks. And what happens after this is basically a updated take on a lot of old westerns, you know, a lot of more violent westerns from a bygone era where the gang would come into town and terrorize everybody and, you know, drag someone behind their horse by the rope and, you know, smash a bunch of windows, rob a bank, you know, grab some women's off the street perhaps, do a lot of shouting and a lot of shooting, set something on fire, create a lot of chaos so that the people are torn between whether to chase the bad guys out of town or to, you know, clean up their storefronts or try to put out a fire or whatever. And in this case, I wonder if Nimrod, who did the Metallica Through the Never movie, saw this film, or if he saw some westerns or whatever, because there's an almost identical shot of someone being dragged through the wet city streets at night by their ankles, tied to the back of one of these thugs' motorcycles. And that happens in the movie Through the Never, too. It's a great shot. It's a great shot in this film. And, you know, like I said, it happened with a horse back in the day in the Hollywood Western era. So that's a classic move. Love that they incorporated that. Nimrod, if you're out there, if somebody knows him, call in and let me know if that was an influence, either this or some famous Western that you watched. Now, I forgot to mention something at the very beginning when they established that there's a couple of cops driving around the neighborhood. This is another one of those cinematic things where, hey, let's make the cops actually look cool because they gave them what looks like a Studebaker or something similar to a Studebaker. I'm not quite a Tucker, but it's one of those old cars with that a B-15 bomber or B-17 bomber. I'm not gonna. Don't get pissed at me if you were like in the Air Force in 1942 or something, and you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not getting it right. I know I'm not getting it right, but one of those old-timey bullet nose planes, those bullet nose cars from a bygone era, seems like to me a very short, limited era of automobile manufacturing, you know, before your 55 Chevys and such. Let's see, but I guess my point was we've established there's cops, and because the cops are close enough to sort of try to intervene on the escape of the gang, we are treated to some serious evidence that our boys on the motorcycles don't give a fuck about the cops. They are not scared. They are, throwing shit into the cops' windshield. They're creating so much chaos that like other people end up banging into the cop car, which is convenient for our villains as they're trying to escape. I love it. I love how well executed all of this is, and it really does establish for you what the stakes are. Diane Lane's character is not going quietly. She's hollering and screaming in a very guttural, like, she's not going, ew, she's like, let me know. Badass. If you're going to be, carried away like a princess to the Koopa castle, and Mario or the guy from 80 of the Cruisers has to come and rescue you. I think that's it for now. Time to hit pause and save some batteries and keep watching. Although it might not take very long before I have something else to say. We'll see. All right, let's talk some straight up Streets of Fire. Obviously, I've been talking about the music. I've been reacting in real time, but I haven't shared much about the making of the film or the writing of the film like I usually would on an episode of the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. So let's get down to a little bit of that. It was actually, to tie into a later comment you'll hear about the Blasters turning down work to be on the soundtrack for 48 Hours. During the making of 48 Hours, screenwriter Larry Gross says, Streets of Fire began in the euphoria of knowing that Paramount really liked 48 and wanted to be in business with us if they could. And us being director Walter Hill, producers Lawrence Gordon and Joel Silver, and aforementioned screenwriter Larry Gross. He says, what happened was that after we screened that cut of 48 Hours for Paramount, Larry looked at Walter and said, Paramount is pregnant. Let's get something and set it up right away. Walter knew what he meant. They were in a great position here. So he said, we can do this two ways. Present an idea now and get a deal done, or write a script on spec, meaning for no money up front, and get a lot more money. Walter proudly considers himself a capitalist, so he suggested we do the latter. According to Hill, the film came about from a desire to make what he thought was a perfect film when he was a teenager. Put all the things he thought were great then, and which I still have great affection for. Custom cars, kissing in the rain, neon, trains in the night, high-speed pursuit, rumbles, rock stars, motorcycles, jokes in tough situations, leather jackets, and questions of honor. Now, from Larry Gross's diary, around the time of the 48 Hours shoot, there's an entry dated 12 August 1982. Walter presents me with a page of notes he's prepared for a new script. It will be the first in a series of adventures of an action hero he's had it in his mind to create for a long time. The character's name is Tom Cody, and Walter has it in his head to create a franchise about him, including him as the Stranger. He asks me if I'm interested in writing the script with him. I ask him, is the Pope Catholic? Larry Gordon and Joel Silver would be along on this ride. Suits me. During 48 Hours, Larry Gross says he thought Hill had received a bum rap on the woman question over the years. He says, people think that he doesn't like women, and he knows that's not true. I think that's going to be demonstrated even more clearly in his next films. He told me he's going to do this new thing. He's going to put a female character right in the center of the narrative. Larry Gross later said they were affected, as everyone was at the time, by the success of Flashdance. And they decided during the writing that that film would be a musical. We said, this movie's a stylized movie. It's not so different from the world of a musical. And there were a few other things that contributed to that direction. One was the decision on Universal's part, a crazy decision, to shoot the movie almost entirely in the studio under a tarpaulin. They built this gigantic tarpaulin And the Battery and all these other places were built as real places, the Richlands. And just so you know, this is the early 80s. And you had stylized films like New York City that were all done on set. And the idea was in the air, that idea of a totally artificial universe. The point is that we had in mind one sentence inspired by George Lucas in a galaxy long ago. That's the direct quote. A futuristic past. That was in our heads. There's the past and there's the future, sort of. I'm going to read out of one page from the book, We've Got the Neutron Bomb, The Untold Story of L.A. Punk by Mark Spitz and Brendan Mullen. Dave Alvin says, the connection I felt with punk rock was this. I was a fry cook in Long Beach, and I saw the Sex Pistols on TV, and Johnny Rotten and I were the same age. Then I decided, well, hell, if he can do this, I can do it too. And I thought, well, you don't have to be the greatest guitar player in the world either. You just have to play guitar. I have my heroes that I've always had. Freddie King, Johnny Guitar Watson, and Chuck Berry that made me want to play. But it wasn't until the Blasters that I played guitar in a band. In a weird way, my biggest guitar influence overall was probably Johnny Rotten. Louis Perez of Los Lobos says, the one specific band from the Hollywood punk scene that got all of us in Los Lobos excited was definitely the Blasters. They were the one band that made sense for us to make the trip over the river from East LA to play the West Side, because when the Roots revival began to happen in Hollywood, we thought maybe there was a place for us too. Rockabilly stuff was happening within this Roots thing, and it just seemed to make sense to try to relate musically. Punk rock itself as a musical genre was really exciting music, but it didn't make any sense to us to try to fit in with that until we heard the Blasters. Dave Alvin says, Club 88. This tiny beer and wine dive in West LA was the only place we could get a gig. Exene Cervenka, apologies if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but was a singer from X. I fell in love with the Blasters and we became instant friends. Dave and Phil and John and I would stay up all night listening to records. They are legendary for their collections and knowledge. I learned most of my musical history from them. I remember lots of scotch, lots of speed, lots of crazy shit. Dave Alvin says, then X asked us to do the whiskey. I'd already seen X play. The first thing that bowled me over was Billy's guitar playing. There was a lot of references in there, almost as if he was deconstructing the history of rock and roll guitar. He'd have rockabilly stuff flying around with surf stuff thrown in and Ramones power chord riffing. Speaking of some happenings later on in the timeline, Dave Alvin says, still, the Roots underground was taking off. The Dills had become a countrified band called Rank and File. And then Los Lobos came out with their EP, and it was obvious right away that they were going places. All right, I just saw a motorcycle crash into the motorcycle, and then another motorcycle go through a glass storefront window. It was awesome. So, bad guys are getting away. The good people of the city are trying to stop them. Or at least they're screaming at them and throwing things at them. One thing I forgot to mention, whoever... Well, I guess it was it Steinman? Jim Steinman wrote this soundtrack? Whoever wrote the song lyrics. Oh my gosh, Jimmy Iovine had something to do with this. Whoever wrote the song lyrics to that first opening scene, that going nowhere fast, you know, like, baby, it's okay that we're going nowhere, but we should be going nowhere fast. Someone was really, really proud of that line. They didn't really build out the song much. Besides that main motif, as far as they didn't pause to say anything, they didn't slow down long to say anything else clever. Let's say that. Now here's some telegraph footage, train footage with Ry Cooder. I mean, this has to be Ry Cooder soundtrack. It sounds a lot cooler than the Crossroads soundtrack work he did, and I say sounds not in, you know, note choices or playing ability, but just the more realistic, gritty, old school sound. Not so cleaned up and 80s sounding like what his slide playing was in the Crossroads film. So I can barely read these notes on the back of the case. Special musical material supervised by Jimmy Iovine. Way to get paid, Jimmy Iovine, for something very indistinct and unclear. Michael Paré showing up. Not looking like a badass, but looking like, you know, a reasonably unfuckable, that's not what I'd say, a reasonably unfuckwithable kind of guy if he sets his mind to defending himself. And if we're going to talk the fuckability of Michael Paré, let's talk about that. I'm not really disposed to finding the physical features of the male of the species attractive, but if I had to be around a certain facial structure and it was going to be male, I mean, Michael Paré is not too shabby. Written by Walter Hill and Larry Gross, this film. And Bill Paxton's in this somewhere, too, I'm seeing in the credits. So, Hill and Gross, I know those names from something else. Directed by, so Walter Hill directed it. Okay, now I'm boring you, I understand. Sorry. I'm watching the movie real time. If I knew more about the making of it, I just put the notes in front of me. We could just do a commentary. But I don't think I have that in me. Also, I don't know that anyone wants that. I don't know that anyone that loves this movie doesn't already know everything possible about it, or that they would be searching podcast episodes to find a commentary for it. Yeah, all right, let's talk a bit about Dance of the Vampires, which was a Steinman project for Broadway that has the reputation of being one of the worst Broadway shows ever. I don't know if that's the case. We'll include a link to a YouTube recording of a live show. It certainly has a reputation for being something that was a disaster in more ways than one. Maybe just because it had a lot of talent behind it that should have created more success. On jimsteinman.com itself, which of course is kind of an out-of-date website. I mean, the poor gentleman has passed away, and we can't expect him to pay, hosting fees or whatever. It looks a little wonky in places, but there is a page for Dance of the Vampires that says Michael Crawford, who was, I guess, famous for having done Phantom of the Opera, and this was his return to Broadway, in Dance of the Vampires, a new musical by Jim Steinman and Michael Kunze. Based on the film by Roman Polanski, Michael Crawford returns to Broadway for the first time since his Tony Award-winning performance in The Phantom of the Opera. Dance of the Vampires is a hot-wired fairy tale in which an aristocratic, charismatic vampire, Count von Krolock, jousts with a young, passionate student, Alfred, to win the body and soul of a beautiful 18-year-old virgin, Sarah, who only knows that she wants more. From an award-winning creative team comes the musical event of the season. Dance of the Vampires is a spectacular roller coaster ride, twisting and turning from romance to comedy to horror, all set against an opulent score and explosive dance. Get ready for a total eclipse over Broadway. And at the top, next to the logo for Dance of the Vampires, it says, what I assume are lyrics to a song, let your dreams out of their cages, every passion and desire. Let your visions be outrageous, set your fantasies on fire. Carpe Noctem. On a related page titled, In a Transylvanian Graveyard, it's got a little synopsis, a little sort of breakdown of what to expect when you go see this show. And I realize this has nothing to do with Streets of Fire, except for the fact that it's Jim Steinman, and it's a clear indicator of what he would do in every situation that he would have sort of creative control over a visual medium, right? That how he would influence it with his own writing and music. And I think it's pretty consistent with the other applications, as in the Meatloaf music videos and other visual interpretations of his music that I've seen. So it says, we are in a Transylvanian graveyard near a village with an unpronounceable name. And I understand this was a Roman Polanski film originally, but I'm saying when you put that in the hands of Jim Steinman, this is kind of what you get. It is 3 nights before Halloween, 1880-something. Sarah, the beautiful teenage daughter of the local innkeeper, is out picking mushrooms when a pack of very cool young vampires appears out of the mist, dancing with rapturous abandon. Sarah is entranced as a coffin rises from the ground, containing the mesmerizing and extremely cool Count von Krolock, alias Michael Crawford. That's not his alias. He's performed by Michael Crawford. The Count sings to Sarah seductively and promises to return for her at the total eclipse of the moon, when Sarah, in exchange for a small bite, can become queen of the vampires and rule the world. How can any small-time girl resist? But then arrives Professor Abronsius, a rather intensely wacky vampire killer, with his handsome, if sweetly dim, assistant Alfred. Alfred is instantly smitten by Sarah and vice versa. Torn between Alfred and the Count, Sarah runs off to Krolock's castle, pursued by Alfred and Abronsius. There are ecstatic love duets, close encounters, unbridled dancing, wild comedy, and, of course, bats and a madman named Boris. Sarah has to choose between earthly love with Alfred or eternal passion with Krolock in the vampire state building. The climactic vampire dance erupts as the moon starts to eclipse, and everybody somehow manages to find happiness, Transylvania style. I guess that would be like a synopsis after the fact, because you don't want, or maybe it was something for investors or some sort of a pre-promotion thing, because you don't want to give away the fact that everyone lives happily ever after, do you? Or maybe that's how Broadway works. Maybe you do want people to know that there's there's no bad endings for anybody. But does that not just work, like fall right in line with the Jim Steinman we've been hearing from, and the Jim Steinman that wrote the lyrics to the songs we've been, digging into? I say so. And I'm saying that because I think it's why his partnerships with certain other artists were so successful, because he seems to have sort of one mode. Okay. And if it's just him doing it for him, or him doing it for a project he has a lot of control over, you kind of know what you're getting over and over again. I mean, there's that writing, that has to be his writing. It's so non-descriptive. It's trying to be evocative, but it's not describing as much as it could. It's written by someone that already probably assumes that you've already bought into it, or you can't help but be swayed by his enthusiasm, because there are close encounters, unbridled dancing. I don't know what those two things mean. Those don't describe things very well. And there was references in the production to his own song lyrics, so Jim Steinman fans would like hoot and holler in the audience, because they were like, "Hey, I get that reference." Steinman's longtime manager for up until partway through the making of Dance of the Vampires was David Sonnenberg, and he at one point said, "It's not surprising that Jim would be excited about this project because he's a vampire himself. He stays up all night long to sleep during the days." It's noted that when he was working on a 2017 live production of a musical of Bat Out of Hell, which of course he wrote songs for, Steinman tasked an assistant with bringing him new sunglasses, each pair spikier and punkier than the last, every 20 minutes. Another colleague from the making of Dance of the Vampires said he painted the windows that faced the park in his apartment in Trump Tower. He painted them all black. And in his Connecticut estate, he always had like a full staff of people, even while he was away, just to feed his cat, I guess. Other people talked about how he always ordered everything off of every menu. Like, you order the left side of the entrees and I'll order the right side of the entrees and bring everything to the table. Or eat $300 worth of McDonald's food at rehearsals. He's an extraordinarily bizarre and wonderful genius, says Sonnenberg fondly.
My father woke up screaming, "Stop! Wait a minute! Stop it, boy! What do you think you're doing? That's no way to treat an expensive musical instrument!" And I said, "God damn it, Daddy! You know I love you. But you've got a hell of a lot to learn about rock and roll!"
Some quotes from Walter Hill about this film. He thought, "The audience will go with you when you set up an abstract world with teenage values and play out a drama within this. It was kind of real, but it wasn't really. I always said, whenever someone says fantasy, they immediately think more Disney-esque. The idea of a hard-hitting drama in a fantasy world, that was kind of different at the time. I always thought of it as a musical. They kind of saw it worked in the world of an MTV video." Gross says that he and Hill were also influenced by the fact that John Hughes films were doing really well around this time. He says, "We were in the universe of the teenage movie, teenage reality. So when we said, here's what's going to be weird about the world of our movie, no one's going to be over 30. The world is a high school, essentially, and Tom Cody will be the football hero. And Willem Dafoe is the greaser." Remember, you had John Hughes at the time, and you had Coppola making 2 high school movies, The Outsiders and Rumblefish. So Walter said, we're going to make a high school movie that's also going to be a comic book and also going to be a musical. Now, the Streets of Fire title came from a song by Bruce Springsteen from Darkness on the Edge of Town, his 1978 record. There were negotiations with Springsteen for the rights to the song, which delayed production multiple times. And there were plans for the song to be on the soundtrack of the film, but to be sung by Ellen Aim at the end. But then when Springsteen was told the song would be re-recorded, not by him, he withdrew permission to use the song. So Jim Steinman comes to the rescue of the whole production, and at the 11th hour to write Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young for the big finale of the film. Publicly, the studio would claim they replaced Springsteen's song because it was a downer. An article from Vulture.com says that Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young was turned in 2 days by Jim Steinman, a song so perfectly suited to the film that producer Joel Silver commissioned $1 million reshoot so the film could close on Ellen performing it. It's $1 million well spent. The ending of Streets of Fire stands as the best filmmaking of Walter Hill's career, and the song is Steinman at his apex. Steinman would say, so I wrote this song that I loved, and I sent it to them, and he and Joel, I remember, left me a great message saying, "I hate you, you bastard. I love this song. We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to rebuild the Wiltern Theater," which they had taken down, meaning the set, the recreation of the Wiltern Theater. It was $1 million to redo the ending, and I felt all his hostility for Universal. A guy named Sean Daniels, who was head of production, one day said to me, "Well, there is hostility because we understand you waited about 8 months to come up with that final song, and you never did it." I said, "Where'd you hear that? I did it in 2 days." He said, "Jimmy Iovine." So I went to Jimmy Iovine, and I said all that to his, "Yeah, it's true. I know. I blamed you. But you can't be upset with me. I'm not like a writer. I've got to make my way with these people. I need to have a scapegoat." Sorry for the weird wording there. That's the quote. I don't know. I said that all to his, "Yeah, it's true. I know." Whatever. All right, friends, we're closing in on an hour, and I think there's enough content to chew on for the time being. I do have either another hour or 2 hours at least that I haven't finished editing yet, and I kind of don't want to sit on this much. I want to put this out a little bite-sized piece because there is so much going on back and forth between the sort of three different voices or narratives or sources, I guess. And I want to give you something for the weekend. Not that it'll matter after this week. It's just for the folks that do subscribe and already know about the show. Something to listen to that's not as heavy emotionally as the last one or as dense with information as the last one and as much of a commitment, since I basically last time did a full film commentary with an extra hour's worth of information after the film was over for you to chew on. So if you like the show, check out the link in the description to support, whether it's through a follow on social media or a donation in cash form on PayPal, or purchasing a fun t-shirt that has an inspirational slogan on it and an aesthetically pleasing design around the slogan. Something that says, kindness and empathy are false gods. Or die wearing flip-flops, that kind of thing. Now, get out there, do your thing today. Do your thing tomorrow. Do your thing in some small way every day that you can. And maybe once a week, help someone else do their thing, eh? Rock and roll is the best thing going, and so are you.